Alright, welcome back everyone to this lesson. And in this video you're going to learn about rests. Now rests are very important because so far, according to what you know, you can never stop playing. You know that you have note values, and each of these symbols mean that you hold a note down for different lengths of time, or beats, and how that conforms to the time signature and the bar. We know that if you have a time signature of, let's say, 4/4, you cannot exceed 4 crotchet beats per bar, and you can also not have any less than 4 crotchet beats per bar. When you're not playing a note, a rest will be symbolized to tell you for how long you're resting for, to make up the missing beats in the bar to add up to the time signature. So in short, rests are symbols that tell you for how long you are not playing anything. You're resting. So rests are actually very well connected to the note values which we learned earlier. We know that we have crotchet, minims, quavers, etc. So essentially, for each of those note values, you have a rest symbol version of it. And this includes dotted notes. So the first one I'm going to draw out here is the crotchet rest, and this is going to be, one of the most common rests that you'll see. For those of you who would like to draw this, you are essentially having a slanted Z shape and then a C shape. Now that would be 1 beat, and this corresponds directly to a crotchet note. So every time you see this symbol, it's saying you do not play anything for 1 beat. This is definitely one of the most unique shaped symbols, so it's very easy to identify it as a crotchet rest because nothing else really looked like it. For the next 2 symbols I'm going to draw out for you, I need to draw a small stave, and you're going to see why in a second. So here we have 2 very similar looking rests. We have, for the minim rest, on the 3rd line a small black rectangular shape that is sort of facing upwards. And then for the semi-brief rest, we have the same rectangular shape pointing downwards. Now obviously when you see the minim rest, exactly the same worth as a minim, you're resting for 2 beats. The same goes for the semi-brief, exactly correlated to the actual note value itself. When you see this symbol, you're resting for 4 beats. The reason I drew these 2 together is because I want you to look at them both side by side. In beginners, these 2 symbols are very commonly confused because they can't really remember which one is going to be a minim and which one's going to be a semi-brief. Now the most common way for teachers to teach their students on how to remember these is to picture a right side up hat for the minim rest and an upside down hat for the semi-brief rest. And you can kind of see it. But I personally don't like using this or teaching this to any of my students because there's no really correlational link between that analogy given and the symbol itself. How can you know if an upside down hat is going to be worth 4 or 2? I'm sure it's very possible to make a link, but for me it's kind of overcomplicating it, and I've actually made a much easier way, which I'm sure somebody else has also thought of. So for this method, you have to actually pay attention to the line which the rest is on. You can see for the minim rest, it is on the 3rd line, and this is irrespective of the clef for any of these rests. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're in treble or bass or any other clef. Whereas the semi-brief rest is on the 4th line, so it's on the higher line. So here that correlational link could be, when you're on the lower line, when the rest is connected to the lower line, it has lower value, okay? So 2 beats. When the rest is on the higher line, it has higher value, so 4 beats. For me, that's the simplest way that I could think of and will not cause you any confusion, very easy to remember. Now quaver rests work in a very similar fashion to actual quaver notes. We talked about the quaver family and how when you have a quaver, if you want to make a semi-quaver, you add another tail. So if I do that here, you have a semi-quaver. So if I wanted to make a semi-quaver rest, I'm going to add essentially another line, which is sort of correlational to the other tail. If for some reason you were to ever find a demi-semi-quaver rest, exact same concept, you add another line and another line here, and that would be 1/8. However, don't worry because quaver rests are a lot more common than semi-quaver rests. So the last thing I want to mention is the appearance of dotted rests. These work in the exact same way as dotted notes do. If, for example, you found a dotted crotchet rest, which is fairly common, that would be 1.5 beats, which equates exactly to the same worth as a dotted crotchet. Because half of a crotchet is a quaver, we're adding a quaver's length onto the crotchet. If we had a dotted minim rest, for example, that would actually turn into 3 beats, which would be the same as a dotted minim. Because half of a minim is a crotchet, that's why it's going to turn into 3. If these symbols are easy for you to remember, then we're going to move straight on to a very quick quiz. Or if you feel like you'd want to spend a bit more time remembering these, I would highly advise you that you draw them out. It'll take you about 30 seconds to just flip it over and check yourself. So if you're fairly comfortable with these, we're going to go straight onto a quiz. Okay, so the first question is, what would this rest be symbolizing? So we can see that we have our rectangular shape on the 4th line. So thinking about that analogy that I gave you earlier, that's going to help you distinguish our 2 main differences here. So if you don't already have it, this is going to be worth 4 beats because it's symbolizing a semibreve. The reason is we are on the higher line, so the 4th line, and it's going to be symbolizing a higher value, whereas this one is on the lower line and symbolizing a lower value. So this one is going to be worth 2 beats. So this is going to be corresponding to a minim note. So for the crotchet beat over here, think about what it's going to be worth and what the symbol is going to be looking like. You don't have to perfectly draw out the symbol, but just when you see it, you can recognize it. So the crotchet is going to be worth 1 beat, and the symbol looks like a slanted Z with a C shape underneath, all in 1 stroke, so that would be a crotchet rest. Now, we have a value of 1/4. So what note is going to be worth 1/4? 4 of something will add up to 1 crotchet beat. So the answer is a semiquaver. So there we have our semiquaver, and for the semiquaver rest, I can draw a little dot here, a little 7 shape, and so far this is just a quaver rest. But to make it a semiquaver rest, I'm going to add another line here in the same way that we add another tail. So hopefully that made sense, and these are symbols that you can recognize easily. We are going to obviously be seeing this in sheet music together, so even if you don't have full confidence, you'll get better the more we go through this. So now I'll draw for you a bar or two so we can see a practical example of what you might find in actual real sheet music. Okay, so here we have a line. We don't have any bar lines or a time signature yet, and because I wanted to take a second here and explain to you common time, which I touched on last lesson. If we have a time signature of 4/4, so 4 crotchet beats, if you see this symbol, just a C shape, that is the Renaissance era symbol to signify 4/4. So these actually have absolutely no difference except a visual difference. I also mentioned there's another symbol, which is a C shape again, but with a line straight through the middle. This would be signifying 2/2, so 2 minim beats per bar. No difference here in terms of how you play or count, it is just a visual difference. These symbols are going to be more common in sort of classical music that you might be learning, and these two will be more in modern sheet music, but it depends on whoever created the score that you're reading from. Before we get to our main exercise, I wanted to show you one thing that is very important that you know. Our semibreve rest, right, which we know as, we have our 5 lines, and it's going to be on the top line, so the 4th line. We know that's a semibreve rest, which is worth 4 beats. But the special thing about this rest is that it's also known as essentially a full bar rest. Meaning, although this is actually worth 4 beats because it's a semibreve rest, this can be used to fill out an entire bar if there's nothing playing in the bar. So even if you're in 3/4, which can only have 3 beats per bar, a semibreve rest can be put here to signify nothing is playing in that bar. Now you might normally think we'd have a dotted minim rest to signify exactly 3 beats per bar to fill this out mathematically. But because of this specific rest can also be used to fill out an entire bar, it doesn't actually matter what the time signature is under the condition that there is nothing in that bar. If you have even 1 semiquaver in the bar, it would have to be accounted for, and the rest would change. So just something to alleviate some confusion, because when you do start reading sheet music, you're probably going to find this and you're not really going to know why. So that is why. So in our first bar we have a G in the left hand, so bass clef, all cows eat grass, and we have a minim. So to help you visualize the time signature in the bar, we're going to draw out the time signature essentially. So we have 3 crotchet beats per bar. So I can really just draw 3 crotchets, and that would be all the beats that you can use in this bar, and that would repeat again for the second bar and every other bar after that. Because a minim is worth 2 beats, we can cross out these 2, and we're left with 1 crotchet beat. For that reason, we're going to add in a crotchet beat rest, because that is just the most logical way of doing this. You're not gonna find like 4 semi-quaver rests to count for 1 beat. Like, that just doesn't happen. Okay, so in our second bar, we have a quaver and we have 2 crotchets. Now, in a time signature of 3/4, 3 crotchet beats, these 2 are immediately canceling out these 2, so very simple. As for our quaver here, it is worth half of a crotchet, so you have to fill out half a beat to make this musically correct. For that reason, we're going to add a quaver rest right over here to signify half a beat of rest. So half a beat plus half a beat would cancel all of that out. The goal is to take the time signature and make sure that everything in the bar cancels out the time signature so that everything is even and musically correct. Now, when you're reading sheet music and you want to be more clear in your head how the rhythm goes, we should clap the line or the bar. This means we're going to make a lot less mistakes when we come to play it because the rhythm is now clear. If you're getting the rhythm wrong on even 1 bar, that's probably because of a small error, like you're playing a quaver for too long, and every time you see a quaver after that, it's going to be too long, and generally the whole rhythm of the entire piece is not going to be really on point. We're going to do these clapping exercises together later, but just to give you a little preview, for this example, we would have 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Obviously with clapping, it's a bit hard to listen and be clear on exactly how long you're holding a note for, but of course you'd be holding a quaver down for half as much as you'd be holding a full crotchet for. Like I said, we'll be doing these kind of things together soon, but that's the gist of it. If you followed and understood what I explained in this video, when you find rests in sheet music that you're going to read, you will be able to understand them. But what I'm about to explain to you now is a bit more advanced. It's more to do with theory and exactly why rests are grouped differently. For example, why would we not use 2 quaver rests? In other bars, you might find a minim rest and then a crotchet, but why wouldn't you just use a dotted minim rest? I'm going to be answering those questions right now in the following explanation, but again, just to remind you, this is not required for you to be able to read and understand what it's asking you to do. This is more for the deeper understanding of why it's happening. And that would give you more confidence when it comes to reading it. So if you'd like to stop here, that's completely fine. And if you want to continue, of course, that's completely fine. So time signatures like 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4 are called simple time signatures. You have a lot more advanced and complex ones, which you definitely don't need to know now. But focusing on the simple ones, we're going to take a look at specifically the top number. So if you're counting in 2 or 3 or 4. There's a sense of pulse, this underlying beat, that some beats are stronger than others. When you're counting in 2, you have 1, 2, 1, 2. So it would be strong, weak. Okay? So S stands for strong and W stands for weak. 1, 2, 1, 2. For counting in 3, you have strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak. For 4 time, it's a bit different. You have strong, weak, medium, weak, strong, weak, medium, weak. This plays a big role in how rests are going to be grouped together. But when it comes to you actually playing music, this is a more advanced technique which we're going to go through. But you essentially adapt your playing a bit to accommodate for these strong and weak beats. So there's 2 things you have to understand here. Sometimes you will join rests together, and sometimes you will separate them. In the instances where you will join rests together is when the beat goes from strong to weak or medium to weak. Essentially, the more powerful beat will join with the weaker beat. You don't see strong plus medium here. In all the instances, it's just strong weak, or strong weak weak, or strong weak medium weak. Now, the instances where you are separating these rests from each other is when you have a weak beat followed by a medium beat. You do not join them, you separate them. Also, a weak beat followed by a weak beat are also separated. Now let me draw this out for you so it can make more sense. So I've not drawn a stave to simplify what you're looking at, and we're working with rests, so where notes are doesn't matter as much. But let's say that this is one bar of 3/4. So 3 crotchet beats per bar. If you have, let's say, a crotchet beat as the first beat, which is where strong is, and remember we're choosing strong, weak, weak because we're counting in 3, like I showed in the previous diagram, you now immediately cancel out this first beat because now, it's separate, like there's nothing you can do with it. So now you're left with 2 crotchet beats, and these are both going to be weak. Now the reason you're not going to find a minim rest, which is worth 2, is because you do not join together 2 weak beats. You separate them. That's this rule over here. So for that reason, you're going to have 2 separate crotchet rest beats. Let's say that instead our crotchet note is going to be on the last beat. So 1, 2, 3. That's going to very easily cancel out the last beat. And it would work the same way if this was 2 quavers. It doesn't matter as long as that beat is now cancelled out. So now you're left with strong and weak. Let's look over here. Do we separate them or do we join them? We're going to join them because strong followed by a weak, it will be joined. So you have 2 crotchet beats merged together. We need a 2 beat rest. So for that reason, you're going to have a minim rest to join them together. Now what if you didn't have any notes in this bar at all and you only had to fill it up with rests? You would not have a minim rest and then a crotchet beat rest. This entire bar would be filled out by 1 semi-brief rest. You're going to see this happen about 97% of the time. There are 1 or 2 instances where this will not be the case, but it doesn't really matter that much because you're still going to understand what you're looking at. Okay, so last example, let's say you're in 4/4 and now you're counting strong, weak, medium, weak. You're going to have 4 crotchet beats, so 4/4, and we have 1 beat already filled out on the second beat, so on the 2. Now 2 quavers together is still 1 crotchet beat, so I'm going to cancel this out because there's nothing else we can do with it. Now on the left side, we are stuck with a strong beat. Because it's on its own, there's no rules of joining or separating. There's no choice but to separate it, so it's going to be a crotchet rest beat. As for medium to weak, we're going to join them according to this rule of here where we join. So for that reason, you're going to have a minim rest over there. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. Now, when you read sheet music and you're seeing why rests are grouped in this way, you will understand why, and that's going to increase your confidence in a great all-round sense. So, great job this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.